ball going back and forth in a line from you to me.
An expert, and I always shy away for the most part when it comes to the photo and film record of Apollo. And I know that occasionally we've gone back and forth on that. But I got the impression, Justin, after talking to you over the years, and I have given you a lot of credit because even though we've locked horns, we've always, for the most part, managed to stay civilized with one another. And I know that when we got a little out of hand, we would actually both step back and we would say, okay, let's take a step back. And I wish I can say that for many others. That doesn't happen. But I got the impression over the years, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you do have some doubts about the Apollo program. I don't think I've ever really heard you express what those doubts are, and I'd be very much interested in hearing what they are.
Well, as far as the photographic record goes, there's discussion on the AD channel about, beer cans and old cars that are covered with concrete, all that stuff. The sea on the rock, like, I'm out on all that stuff. I won't even acknowledge that as it's kind of like the whole flag waving thing. It's just, as far as if you're trying to make the case of Poe was fake, I think you're barking up the wrong tree with that. Marcus talked about, he always holds up his piece of film. Outgassing and all that stuff, that's a real thing, but it doesn't happen immediately as soon as film is exposed to vacuum. So as far as the film thing goes, even if you look at Hexagon and Corona and all that, sure, there have been systems where they've had to pressurize the film, but usually it's when it's duration of months where the film would be exposed to low pressure or vacuum. So there's a paper on Ollis, and I forget who wrote it. It's one of the Russian guys, and I think you referenced them in your book, your first book. And it's about probably pronouncing it wrong, Inconel 500. It's some of the materials that they use for the construction of the F1. And, I'm not a mechanical engineer. I worked with them when I was doing electro-optical work. And, we regularly sent parts out for heat treating and all kinds of stuff with just the hardware that we were working on. So that's an area that I could probably figure it out, but it's just not something I've ever spent any time on. My brother-in-law is a graduate degree mechanical engineer and a manager for GE aircraft, I think. And, I could probably talk to him about it if I wanted to bother him with it. But I think some of that stuff, like if you look at the specific materials that were used to construct the spacecraft, and then we got barbecue mode and all that, but expansion and contraction, and I think that might be worth diving into if you were really trying to make a case for, like, here's the level of detail where they blew it. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
Sure, no, it does.
That's something that I've always wondered about.
Can I ask sorry, do you want to respond to that? No, I'll ask a question in a minute if you want to say something about that, Randy.
No, it is a point that I value that in terms of what Justin just made here. I value that point. I have actually sort of carried that line of thinking over into other aspects of the Apollo missions. I've stayed away, as I said earlier, from the photography and film record. There's enough experts out there discussing this. Marcus just did a 4-hour debate with MC Toon on that, so people can refer to that for, you pretty well get all you need to know in that debate. But we don't focus enough on the testing aspect, and there's other components in the Apollo program that are very questionable when it comes to testing. And I have actually put a quote in my book, in my second book, from one of the officials that was involved in the. I'll look up the quote when Justin's talking, but he was. He made reference to the quality control, and as an engineer, he was really involved in the Apollo missions. He was really taken aback by the lack of quality control. That's a very strong statement. Now, people will say that's not a smoking gun, but that's a very strong statement. And when you take a step back and then you take that 40,000-foot view, that statement has even more of an impact to actually say, we achieved the greatest scientific we made the greatest scientific achievement of mankind. And then you have an engineer who's actually involved in the very missions you're talking about that comes along and says, I was really taken aback by the lack of quality control. That's a very loaded statement.
Justin, is it surprising to you that this whole thing worked with as few casualties as it did? Because obviously there were casualties in Apollo 1 right there on the launch pad. But, you know, if I was a betting man in 1965 or whatever, and said, okay, could you pull off these 6 missions to the moon and only one of them will really go wrong at all and the guys will still come home safely and they're going to land this craft on the moon on this surface and they're going to take it off again from there and no one's going to die in this whole process and they're not going to go splat into the moon as they're flying towards it. I wouldn't have bet on that, right? I would have bet no, like there's going to be 100 men die in the effort to go through the vacuum of space and land on orbiting rock, and the idea that they can come home safely again, not bounce off the atmosphere and go into an eternal orbit around the sun. All of those other possibilities seem far more likely to you. And just to, you know, somewhat acknowledge Randy's point, without saying it's necessarily true, do you have that sense of like slight incredulity at this? I think, wow, that is really surprising.
Well, I mean, even the guys that went, if you watch any of the documentaries that have the astronauts talk about how unbelievable that it is. And I think that Apollo 13 has been dramatized and sensationalized as like the big catastrophe mission, and the guys came back and survived. But I think if you really go through all the other missions, there were problems constantly of lesser significance, at least relative to what happened on 13. I think that, you know, because of the way that they basically rushed everything through, you know, they were trying to hit that, they were trying to beat the Soviets, they were trying to honor the commitment that Kennedy made, that, yeah, it was risky. Mueller even said when, you know, he had to go toe to toe with Werner von Braun in order to change the testing methodology. And what Mueller, this all up concept wasn't new to Apollo. Like the missile programs and stuff he had worked on before he came into NASA. It's what they had done and had success with. But he did acknowledge, yeah, you know, this definitely increases the risk. And I think the guys, the pilots, the astronauts rather, who most of whom were test pilots, they were aware of what they were getting into. So I think had the program continued, sure, I think it's possible that they could have lost the whole crew. But as far as incredulity that they could have done it at all, that's tough. I mean, I think honestly, like the emotional part of this that Randy talked about, people will come at him or at people who say it was faked or hoax. I don't know if I'm able to completely set that aside. And it's not a pride thing or a national pride thing. It's just, it's remarkable, but I don't think it's impossible.
Okay, I'd like to put a slightly different question in, just because I think it'll be interesting for the audience if a broader range is covered, whilst acknowledging that the two of you might have certain specialties. And I'd like to just ask you both about the photographic record. Now, Randy, I think this question might be a little bit more challenging for you. So I'd like to, I know, Justin, you just made some comments on how there are certain things, like there's a famous image of a letter C on one of the rocks, and that's held up as proof that the photo was faked. And you're saying that's not even worth talking about. So for me, the photographic record, one thing I find very compelling is when I see in documentaries like American Moon, these tippity-top photographers from Italy who are held up as being the best in the world in their craft, saying, oh, these are not even a good fakes, and really like laying it on thick about that. You think, well, you know, I'm sure these men know photography, right? And that's very strange. Either photographers, there's a lot of photographers who really don't know what they're looking at when they're looking at a photograph, or the Apollo moon landings are faked. But in interviews I've done, I've seen the people demonstrate the kind of bending of shadow effects, and just like from walking down the street and seeing a tree shadow across a pavement. So I really don't know what to make of that. I really don't. And in other areas, like with the videography, when I interviewed uh, Bart Sabrell, and then I interviewed one of his critics, a man who made a Gem, who made a documentary criticizing him. And his a funny thing happened. And I came away thinking, yeah, Bart Sabrell just does not have footage demonstrating that we didn't go to the moon. He's just gotten that completely wrong, and I don't know how he could have gotten it wrong. And Bart Sabrell refused to debate Gem or really interact further on that. Well, let's not say that. He refused to debate Gem, his critic, saying it was about his mind being closed, and I really didn't get that. So my question, I suppose, to Justin would be, have you seen anything in the photographic record where you think, wow, yeah, I just cannot explain that? And to Randy, I think this might be a slightly more tricky question, Randy, because I on one hand, I really respect that you like stay to the lane that you feel you're strongest in and don't comment on areas that other people are strong in, like Marcus Allen say. But the fact that you are so heavily invested in this moon landing area and that you're not really prepared to make a definitive statement about the photographs indicates to me that the photographic evidence possibly isn't that strong. If you can listen to an associate of Marcus Allen, but not come out there and say, oh, definitely, look at this. There's no other way you could explain that. So maybe Randy first. Do you feel that that's a fair characterization? I appreciate I'm being quite pointed there, Randy, and I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball, but what is your sort of general opinion of the photographic evidence?
Yeah, so no, that's a good question. I actually like the question, and throw me all the curveballs you want. That's okay. Um, First of all, I respect Marcus Allen. I have the utmost respect for him, and I know I'll sound biased in this, but he is a wealth of information. I did have the opportunity of meeting Marcus Allen back in 2019, and I was on my way through to India, and I had stopped in Britain, and I met up Marcus Allen for dinner, and we talked for 5 hours. It seemed like we talked for a half hour. That's how fast it went, because I was actually passing through, so I was only there for 1 or 2 nights. So, but when it comes to the photo and film record, yeah, I have mixed feelings about it, because I said earlier in this particular discussion that I often think it's a red herring, but because those photos and that film can be updated. I mean, we have incredible technologies when it comes to the photographic ability of anybody. I mean, what they were doing 50 years ago, people are doing on a laptop computer today. So let me speak to that question as from a layperson's point of view. Okay, I don't want to get into, because I will not get into the technical aspect of it. It's not my thing, and I fluff it off. I haven't seen anything that's convincing, because I have eyes, and I have my a discernment, and I can think too. I don't have to be an expert and just because an expert says it, whether they say the photos are fake or not fake, is immaterial to me. I can look for myself, and I'll make that decision, right? I'll take a little bit of what they're saying, and then I'll make that decision. I value the experts, but I value them when I feel they're right, and I have instincts, and my instinct sometimes tells me that sometimes these experts can be bought off on both sides. Right, so it puts the person like myself, when it comes to a lay person like myself, in terms of the photos and the film, in a very different situation, because I feel like I'm standing outside looking in. So I'll use one example. I saw in the video debate with Marcus Allen and MC Toon, who is a proponent of the missions, brought up, and I knew this was coming, it was inevitable. He brought up the experiment that was done on the moon with the dropping the feather and the hammer. And of course, they should drop at the same rate and at the same time, because there's no atmosphere, there's no resistance on the lunar surface. Great. But I've seen that very same experiment done here on Earth, and you get the same results at the same rate, at the same time, with the feather and a hammer. So I just fluff it off. It doesn't mean anything to me, because that can be duplicated here. And of course, we have the ability of special effects. But the other aspect of the photo record is something that Justin made reference to a little while ago, and that is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2009. And I've looked at many of the photos of the lunar surface taken from that camera. And again, I'm coming from a layperson's point of view. I don't have photographic technology. So, all you people out there, don't jump on me. I'm just making, this is just an observation on my part. And I see detailed clarity from that LOR of areas that are outside of the Apollo landing sites. But when that same camera is used to take photos of the actual Apollo landings, I see nothing but blurry images. And from a layperson's point of view, getting out of all of the technical stuff, going back and forth, whether you're for or against, I've had many people, myself included, say, well, wait a minute, how come I'm seeing such clarity of that moon mountain, but then when you show me a photo of the Apollo landing site, I see nothing but blurry images. And what's more, and I find it very interesting that you see the basic outline of the lander. There's no detail on that. You see either 3 legs or you see 4 legs. It's supposed to have 4 legs, but you see sometimes you see 3 legs. But lo and behold, even though you can't see any detail on that particular photo in terms of the Apollo 11 lander, let's just pick that one as an example. You see footprints. How is it that you can see the footprints, but you can't see the detail on the lander? And that's my line of reasoning here. And I'm looking for a duplication of those photos that were produced from other areas of the lunar surface outside of the Apollo landing sites taken by the same camera from the same orbiter.
Okay, I'll make 2 comments there briefly, if I may, before handing over to Justin. As one's kind of for and one's kind of against. So the for one is when I interviewed you, Randy, I thought it was interesting. I asked you about what would be like some kind of thing that would falsify your position. And you mentioned one of like a strong thing that could happen that would really be troubling would be if there were photographs of the lunar lander site emerged. And I think if I'm remembering this correctly, you said that why you didn't think they could just do that or fake them is because they can't guess the erosion that would have taken place had those landers really been there. So I thought that was a very interesting point. And I will just comment, it maybe there's an explanation for this, but it does strike me as bizarre that I can go onto Google Maps now and see the car I had parked outside of my house in 2009 in really good clarity, to the point of, oh yeah, I remember having that car. And as we've sailed past the 50th anniversary of the landings, there are no high resolution photographs of the of any of the sites. That does strike me as very strange. Now, okay, that's the point kind of for the hoax position. And my somewhat against point is the hammer and the feather. I've seen video of that being done on the Earth too. I've never replicated it. I don't know quite how that's the case, that they can drop at the same rate in when the feather's in air, but I have seen video of it. I actually imported that video into my movie editor, and I timed the release point. I estimated the height of the drop from getting the astronaut's height, and I timed the drop rate and got my high school physics textbook out and spent quite a long time remembering how to do that, and eventually calculated the gravity to see how much the film would have had to have been slowed down. And lo and behold, I got the rate to be 2.5 times less. So the gravity was moon gravity. I think it's 1.6 meters per second, which would mean the film had been slowed down 2.5 times. Now, I don't know if it's possible to slow down film 2.5 times. When I hear about the film being slowed down, people are usually saying it's slowed down to half the rate, and then the astronauts are on wires or something. So I did think that was interesting, that if the film was faked, they got the gravity right. They got, and I've seen other things that have been dropped, and other objects you can estimate the height that have fallen, where apparently, I've not mapped it myself, but apparently the gravity is correct too. Because I thought the gravity could be a real slam dunk thing, because all you've got to do is find one thing that falls at a rate that is not consistent with moon gravity, and it's going to be very hard to account for that in the we went to the moon hypothesis. So that's my comment on that. And I think, Justin, the original question was, is there anything you've seen in the photographic record that you find really troubling, or do you think it's all kind of really quite explicable? And then any comments you would have on anything that Randy or I have just said there.
I don't have any issue with the photographic record. I mean, as far as the lighting and shadows and stuff, are these the film experts that were in the documentary? I haven't seen it. I've seen other people refer to it. I think I looked into before they were like food photographers. And I mean, I've been to Nikon school. I shot on film, um, even astrophotography before digital became in vogue. So I'm by no means an expert, but like I think that it's a foreign environment, and there's no atmosphere, single light source. The ground's uneven. I think it's pretty easy to explain away a lot of the criticisms that we see of the photos. And I know there's some very detailed write-ups with charts and math that have been done by people that cry foul. Um, I don't know if either of you gentlemen are aware of the company NVIDIA. They're basically they make video cards for engineering machines and for gaming, and you know they're experts on how light interacts and can exactly recreate that environment. And they did a thing to kind of to bust the whole. There's the famous picture that Neil took of Buzz coming down the ladder, where Buzz appears to be more brightly lit than he should be, and they did a whole big video where they're basically blowing that argument up. So no, I haven't really seen anything. It'd be super cool to have like a long conversation with Marcus. I know that um, he gets hit a lot for his the thing he did with the British Interplanetary Society, where he did say that he felt that we actually went there based on his examination of the photographic record and also the LRO images. And then, he's since time goes on, people change their mind, people get more information, that's fine. But, 2009, when we took I worked with them, when they took the images of the landing sites, I think that was incidental. I mean, the LRO was not sent to the moon to validate Apollo. It had science missions, and then they were also able to do this. And I think in 2012, they hit them again at lower altitude, and those pictures are clear. You'll notice too, I don't know if you've seen it on NASA's website, they have these landing site images, and there's a slider that you can move left and right, and basically it changes the sun angle, where they've taken photos of these sites where the sun's at a different position in the sky. There are some where the footprints disappear depending on the angle of the sun, and then the shadows on the lander become evident. You can actually see the shadows of all the legs, and then there are others where the footprints and the LSEP stuff is more visible. So it just depends on altitude and also the position of the sun, the angle at which the light's coming in. And then, China's on record. Ross did an interview too, or a debate recently where he did acknowledge that China had publicly said that they had, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Chang'e 2 lunar hardware, or that signs of Apollo on the lunar surface. Most recently, India, Israel had some much more detailed photos of, I forget which site it was or sites. Japan has also confirmed. So there's all that. I don't know. I feel like I've been talking too long, but yeah.
Well,
so the
that's
photographic
great.
record is there's nothing in it that would convince me that Apollo didn't happen.
Okay, gentlemen, we're not a million miles off being on for an hour. So, I mean, I'm happy to go on longer, but I'd always prefer to come back at a later point and talk more too. So, open it up and say what's on your minds that you would really want to put to each other, or statements you'd like to make. Randy, perhaps I'll come to you first on that. What have you come into this as anything that you feel is important to say that you haven't said yet that you'd like to now?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of I'd like to respond to a couple of comments that Justin had just made, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
You see, this getting back to the photo and film record, as I said earlier, it's a red herring, because he just made a very interesting comment there that you can adjust the lighting on your laptop in terms of the photos. And see, this is what I'm talking about, is that it can be manipulated. It can be manipulated. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying it can be.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to remember that the LRO, an expensive piece of machinery, we didn't go there to photograph the moon. Why not? I mean, why not photograph the landing sites? This is, again, we go back to what we've been constantly told time and time again, that this is man's greatest scientific achievement. We have a right to see a little more detail. And why wouldn't NASA spend an extra few dollars of the $20 billion they're getting a year still on, focusing in on those landing sites and giving us a better view? Hell, I got a better one. How about putting a live cam right next to the lander of 9/11, like they did, like they had, or no, 11, pardon that, Apollo 11. There's a Freudian, Apollo 11.
We'll do
So
9/11
like
next
they,
week, okay?
yeah. So like they did with the JFK assassination, they have a live cam right there in Dealey Plaza, right on the 6th floor, overlooking the assassination site. I don't know why anybody wants to look in on that. I visited that site, but nonetheless, they have a camera there. And there's all kinds of other questions, like why couldn't we do that on Apollo 11? Apollo 11 is the flagship, right? It's the one mission that everybody thinks about. And there was one more point I do want to make before I moved on, is with all due respect, of course, to what Justin is saying, we tend to forget that back then, and maybe even today, the U.S. military had the largest, most sophisticated movie studios in the world, that even surpassed Hollywood. And a lot of the technology that they were using then is still classified. Photographic technology is still classified to this day. So we don't know what their capabilities are. I was actually impressed that they were 50 years ago able to duplicate not only zero gravity in planes to train astronauts, they were actually able to duplicate 1/6 gravity as well. I didn't know that until I researched my book. So you see, it can go back and forth, and there's a counterpoint to every point that's raised. That's my point here when it comes to the photo and film record.
Justin, anything you'd like to say, respond to questions for Randy, anything you've come in thinking you really want to say and haven't said yet?
Well, just very quickly on the testing for the F1, just one thing here real quick. Let me find it again. There's that paper, Rainey, have you seen of Remembering the Giants PDF from I forget what year it was they had that, but Robert Biggs spoke about the F1, and he had a PowerPoint slideshow up, and it shows that the last engine test for the F1 was April 1st of 73. So I know that they had increased the amount of weight that I think it lift, especially like for Skylab and for the J missions later on. So anyway, just throwing that out there. I mean, if we're running low on time, I really just want to say I'm grateful for the opportunity to finally get to talk to Randy and Richard. I think you've been terrific. It's actually been fun. Time went by really fast. I wouldn't mind doing it again if it's worth having me be part of it. But to Randy's final point there about, it almost comes down to a he said, she said sort of thing. And certainly there are reasons why they would have fabricated it, given all the stuff that we talked about earlier. And I just haven't seen anything yet, but doesn't mean it's not out there.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much. I feel good wrapping up there if the two of you do. And we'll put this out there and see what feedback people have and where we could potentially take a further dialogue in the future. So, are we good with that? Is there anything we're missing, or?
No, I like that. I think we've gone on for about an hour, 20 minutes, maybe, or maybe an hour, 5 minutes. Actually, it did go fast. I wasn't expecting it to go. Yeah, it went really fast. There's a lot to talk about here. We haven't even scratched the surface, and so I do appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion or debate, whatever you want to call it, with you as a moderator and of course with Justin. So I definitely appreciate that. I am, it's kind of nice when the two opposing views who are civilized with each other can come on here and have a really good discussion. And one of my criticisms with the debate that we saw with Marcus Allen and MC Toon is just the abuse that went on there from, from one side. I'll try to be fair here. I won't name names, but there was a fair amount of abuse, and I don't like that. If that happens, I end the debate. I will not discuss anything with anybody who gets into that level of abuse. And I really appreciate, Justin. I appreciate your comments today. I appreciate the frank discussion we have, and I would look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, thank you. Nobody looks good when they do that kind of thing. So yeah, I appreciate the civility and reflections you've both brought today. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And I look forward to doing this again. Thank you.
Yes, I do too.
See you guys. Thanks.
Your love's just like a wrecking ball going back and forth in a line from